Part 1: The Sacred Origins of Japanese Music. Welcome. Tonight, we begin a slow journey through the history of Japanese music, not as a fast lecture and not as a list of dates, but as a quiet, unfolding story. A story that begins long before cities, before concert halls, before pop songs and digital sound. It begins in forests, in wind, in ritual. Long before Japan became a modern nation, music already existed as something sacred. In early Shinto belief, sound was not entertainment. It was a bridge between the human world and the world of the spirits, known as kami. In small wooden shrines, often surrounded by tall cedar trees, priests and shrine maidens performed rituals called kagura. Kagura was not loud, it was not dramatic. It was deliberate. Slow drums echoed like distant footsteps. Flutes carried thin, airy tones into the sky. The movements were careful, measured. Each sound had intention. Music at this time was an offering. It was meant to invite the divine into the present moment. If you imagine ancient Japan, try not to imagine large cities. Instead, picture mist, forests stretching for miles, wooden structures lit by firelight. In that quiet world, music did not compete with noise. It blended with nature. Wind through leaves, water moving across stones. The boundary between music and environment was almost invisible. Over time, these sacred sounds began to evolve. As political structures formed and an imperial court was established, music entered a new space. This was the birth of gagaku. Gagaku means elegant music. It became the official music of the Japanese imperial court. And remarkably, it is still performed today. Gagaku is considered one of the oldest continuously performed orchestral traditions in the world. Its sound is unlike Western classical music. There is no rush, no dramatic crescendo. Instead, tones stretch outward, as if time itself has slowed down. One instrument, called the sho, produces soft, sustained chords that feel almost like breathing. Another, the hichiriki, creates a piercing, reedy melody that moves gently but with deep emotion. And beneath it all, drums mark the passage of time in calm, spacious rhythms. Listening to gagaku can feel like standing inside history. The music does not push forward. It hovers. It invites patience. During this same era, Buddhism arrived in Japan. From China and Korea, with it came a new form of sacred sound, Buddhist chanting. Monks recited sutras in low, resonant voices. The chants were steady, repetitive, hypnotic. The goal was not performance, it was focus. Breath aligning with syllables, mind aligning with sound. In many ways, this chanting tradition shaped Japan's relationship with repetition in music. Repetition not as boredom, but as meditation. As centuries passed, Japan entered the medieval period. Warrior clans rose to power. The samurai class emerged, and with them came new artistic forms. One of the most important was biwa hoshi, storytelling. Blind musicians traveled from town to town, playing the biwa, a short-necked lute, while reciting epic tales of war and loyalty. The most famous story was the tale of the Heike. These performances were emotional, yet controlled. The biwa's sharp-plucked notes created tension. The voice carried sorrow. Even in stories of battle, there was restraint. Japanese musical aesthetics often favored subtlety over spectacle. Silence became as important as sound. This concept, known as ma, refers to the space between moments, the pause, the breath, the stillness that gives shape to everything around it. Without silence, music has no form. And in Japan, this idea became foundational. By the 14th century, another art form emerged: Noh theater. Noh combined music, poetry, dance, and drama. Its stage was simple. Its movements were slow. The music featured drums, a flute, and chanting voices. But again, the pacing was deliberate, almost dreamlike. Noh performances were not meant to overwhelm the audience. They were meant to suspend time, to create an atmosphere where emotion lingered quietly, instead of exploding outward. If Western opera is powerful and expansive, Noh is minimal and inward. Both are expressive, but in very different ways. As we move through these early centuries, a pattern begins to appear. Japanese music developed with deep respect for nature, ritual, and emotional subtlety. Volume was rarely the focus. Instead, attention was placed on texture, on breath, on the feeling between notes. This foundation would influence every era that followed. Even modern Japanese pop music, centuries later, still carries echoes of these early traditions. But for now, we remain in the ancient world, a world of wooden temples, court musicians in silk robes, traveling storytellers under open skies. Music, not as industry, not as product, but as atmosphere, as spiritual connection, as shared memory. And as we slowly close this first chapter, The History of Japanese Music, Part 2. From the Heian court to the rise of the samurai. Tonight, we continue our quiet journey through the history of Japanese music. In the first part, we explored the sacred beginnings, the sounds of Shinto ritual, early court traditions, and the slow shaping of a musical identity. Now we move forward into a new era, an era of elegance, refinement, and subtle beauty. This is the Heian period. The Heian period began in the year 794. Japan's capital was moved to Heian-kyo, the city we now call Kyoto. For nearly 4 centuries, this city became the center of culture, poetry, and art. And music flourished quietly within the walls of the imperial court. Life in the Heian court moved slowly. Aristocrats wore layered silk robes. They wrote poetry by moonlight. They listened to the soft rustle of wind through bamboo. Music was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was restrained, delicate, intentional. Gagaku continued to evolve. During this time, it became more refined, more structured. The musicians of the imperial court trained carefully to preserve its form. Instruments like the sho, a small mouth organ, created soft clusters of harmony. The hichiriki carried a piercing, emotional tone. And the biwa, a short-necked lute, added gentle rhythm to the air. The music was slow. Notes were held longer than expected. Silence was just as important as sound. This concept that silence has meaning would become a defining characteristic of Japanese art. Outside the court, another musical world was beginning to form, a more grounded one, a more human one. By the late Heian period, political power was slowly shifting. The elegant aristocrats were losing influence. Warrior clans were rising. The samurai were beginning to shape the future of Japan, and with them, a new type of storytelling emerged. The biwa took on a different role. Traveling monks, known as biwa hoshi, began to recite epic tales while playing the instrument. Their most famous story was the tale of the Heike. It told of war, loss, impermanence, the fall of powerful families, the fragility of human life. The chanting style was rhythmic but flexible, half spoken, half sung. The voice rose and fell like waves. The biwa punctuated the story with sharp, deliberate notes. These performances were not entertainment in the modern sense. They were meditation, a reminder that all things must pass. This idea, impermanence, is deeply connected to Buddhism, and Buddhism was becoming increasingly influential during this era. Buddhist chanting, known as shomyo, developed into a highly disciplined art. Monks would chant sutras in long, sustained tones. The rhythm followed breath. The melody followed devotion. There were no instruments, only the human voice, layered, resonant, calm. In temples, these chants echoed softly against wooden walls. In candlelight, sound seemed to float. Music was no longer only for courts or warriors. It became a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. As Japan moved into the Kamakura period, in the late 12th century, the samurai class fully took control. The atmosphere changed. It became more disciplined, more austere. Music followed this shift. It grew simpler, stronger, more direct. Court elegance did not disappear, but it no longer stood alone. Now, music reflected both refinement and resilience, grace and strength, silence and steel. This blending of influences laid the foundation for future traditions. No theater would soon emerge. Zen philosophy would deepen the appreciation of minimalism and the idea that beauty exists in simplicity would shape Japanese music for centuries. As we rest here at the edge of the medieval world, we can feel the transformation from sacred ritual to court elegance, from aristocratic refinement to warrior storytelling. Japanese music was not static. It moved with the rhythm of history itself. In the next part, we will explore how theatrical performance, Zen philosophy, and the early modern era further transformed Japan's soundscape. For now, let your thoughts slow. Imagine Kyoto under a quiet night sky, the distant echo of a biwa, the soft breath of a temple chant, and the steady passage of time. Rest here and drift into the continuing story. The History of Japanese Music, Part 3. Noh, Zen, and the Sound of Silence. Tonight, we continue our quiet journey through the history of Japanese music. So far, we have moved from sacred ritual to court elegance, from aristocratic refinement to the rise of the samurai. Now we enter a world of stillness, a world where silence is not empty, but alive. The 14th century marked a turning point. Japan was no longer ruled by court nobles. The warrior class had taken control. And with this shift came a new artistic expression, one that blended discipline, spirituality, and performance. This was the birth of Noh theater. Noh was not loud. It was not fast. It did not seek to overwhelm. Instead, it invited the audience to slow down, to observe, to listen carefully. The stage was simple: a wooden platform, a painted pine tree at the back. Few props, few movements. Everything was deliberate, measured, restrained. Music in Noh was essential, but it never dominated. It supported. It breathed with the actors. The musical ensemble was small: a flute called the Nohkan, and 3 drums. The kotsuzumi held at the shoulder, the otsuzumi held at the hip, and sometimes a larger drum called the taiko, the flute, pierced the air with a sharp, almost haunting tone. The drums did not create steady rhythm, as in Western music. Instead, they followed breath. They followed emotion. They followed tension. Between sounds, there was space, long pauses, moments where nothing happened, and yet everything happened. This concept is known in Japan as ma. Ma is the space between things, the silence between notes, the pause between movements, the stillness between breaths. In Noh, ma is everything. Without silence, sound has no meaning. Without emptiness, form has no shape. Zen Buddhism deeply influenced this way of thinking. Zen teaches that truth is found not in excess, but in simplicity, not in noise, but in quiet awareness. As Zen spread among the samurai class, it shaped their aesthetics. Their gardens became minimal. Their poetry became concise. Their tea ceremonies became rituals of precision, and their music followed the same path. No chanting was controlled and restrained. The voice did not rise dramatically. It hovered. It lingered. It moved slowly through tonal patterns that felt timeless. To modern ears, no music may feel unfamiliar, even distant, but that distance is intentional. It creates reflection. It creates space for thought. During this same era, another instrument began to grow in importance: the shakuhachi, a simple bamboo flute with 5 finger holes. Nothing ornate, nothing decorative, just bamboo, breath, and air. The shakuhachi became associated with Zen monks known as komuso. These monks used the flute As a form of meditation, they called it suizen, blowing meditation. Each note was not merely played, it was breathed. The sound was fragile, sometimes airy, sometimes broken, sometimes almost silent. Imperfection was not a flaw. It was the point. Zen aesthetics embrace the imperfect, the incomplete, the fleeting. This idea is known as wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi finds beauty in weathered wood, in fading leaves, in quiet sounds that do not last. Music became less about performance and more about presence. As Japan moved into the Muromachi period, these ideas continued to deepen. Article was no longer about display. It was about atmosphere, about mood, about subtlety. Music did not demand attention. It invited contemplation. By the time the Edo period approached, Japan had developed a unique musical identity, one shaped by Shinto spirituality, court refinement, warrior discipline, Zen minimalism, and a profound respect for silence. When we listen to traditional Japanese music today, we can still hear these layers, the sacred echo of ancient ritual, the elegance of court harmony, the solemn rhythm of warrior tales, and the quiet breath of Zen bamboo. In the next part, we will step into the vibrant world of the Edo period, a time when cities expanded, when merchants flourished, when new instruments filled the streets and music became part of everyday life. For now, imagine a wooden stage under lantern light, a masked actor moving slowly, a single flute note cutting through silence and the space between sounds, stretching endlessly. Rest there. Let the silence settle gently and drift into the next chapter of Japan's musical story.